Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stephenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top-quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Audley Stephenson, and thank you for checking out another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. Of course, this is hands down the most audacious podcast you'll ever find on the internet, and I appreciate you taking a time out of your day and choosing it to spend it here with us as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the handle The Audacious Pod. And then if you head over to Facebook, you'll also find us there as The Audacious Living Podcast. And hey, if you're watching on YouTube, then you know that you can simply subscribe to our channel by tapping the notification bell. And that's it. You're connected. So we make it super, super easy. And I'd encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, go and tell your neighbor, tell a friend, and we'll keep this good old audacious conversation flowing. Now, we're going to talk about organizational culture on this episode, and to understand organizational culture and how to make them more audacious, the first step is to recognize that they're often shaped by the manner in which the individuals act within an organization. And when I say act, I'm specifically referring to the behaviors that people exhibit, which can include, the beliefs, habits, norms, how they interact with each other. All of these things fall under this category. Essentially, if you think about it, organizations are defined by people's behavior. Now, this is a key concept to understand because when there's a change or shift that needs to be made, it's extremely important to know where and what your starting point should be. And this is exactly where today's guest comes in absolutely perfectly. His name is Rich Stephenson, no direct relation, shared same last name, but no direct relation. He's an executive coach, a leadership consultant who's been in the field for more than 20 years. And he's a senior executive. He's been a senior executive in large companies across the world, in Australia and Asia and the UK. His company, the Culture Shifter, through his company, Culture Shifter, he helps leaders recognize the importance of building relationships that will effectively lead to be able to manage, motivate, inspire individuals at all levels of the organization. And here's a key point. The process of building relationships often starts with a small act that grows and develops. It sounds simple, but there is a lot of work that goes into building the culture of the organization. And so, again, I think Rich is a perfect individual to have this conversation with. I'm really, really pleased that he's here. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop talking and give you an opportunity to hear from Rich Stephenson. Enjoy. Get started. I don't often get into big, long introduction, if you will. If you're okay with that, I'm okay with that. We'll just get going, okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Rich, I appreciate you taking time and being here, joining me on the Audacious Living Podcast. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Well, you're welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here, Audley.
Good. So maybe just to get it out of the way, so there's no confusion, because I know people are going to say, "Hey, they look alike, they got the same last name, but we're not related." Okay, we're not. Let's take it that. So there's no confusion. Okay, no blood relation.
It's a great name, though.
I'm not going to argue with you. Rich, I really fascinated the work that you do as an executive coach for leaders, and certainly want to dive into that a little bit and understand a little bit about your work. But before we do that, I want to sort of talk about your background and what got you to the work that you're doing now, because I find oftentimes there's something that shifts for individuals, and when they want to sort of refocus, and obviously working with specifically with coaches or coaching leaders rather, I would imagine it was some kind of shift for you. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. So I guess something that I wouldn't say it sets me apart, but a lot of coaches get into coaching for many different reasons.
Sure.
For me, I'd spent more than 30 years in corporate life, and about 20 of that at sort of senior executive levels in large listed companies and so on. And I guess the thing that would, if I ever thought that there was some calling about it, the thing for me that I always enjoyed was developing people. That's what really got me out of bed in the morning. I started out as an accountant, and don't hold that against me, but
I won't.
Yeah, so I just spent quite a bit of my career in finance, and then it started to evolve into sort of more commercial roles and then general management. But the one thing, whilst the roles were different, the one common theme all the way through was people. It was about working with people, creating opportunities for people, giving people the space to grow. And I guess the other part of it was the feedback as well. And, some of the tougher conversations to help them grow as well. Yeah. And I guess that sort of over time, that sort of when I moved to Canada, and I had a role where I spent a lot of time traveling in remote parts of Canada, and I spent a lot of time sitting in trucks with sales reps and so on, hours upon hours. And that was, gave me an opportunity to get to know people at an even deeper level than I might otherwise.
Yes. Yeah.
And
that's a really key point, Rich, in terms of being able to connect with people at that level. They're more than just names on a piece of paper or numbers or stats or whatever. Like, you have the opportunity to not only just understand them, what they do, but what's important to them, what matters, their values, even all of those things come into play. Yeah,
absolutely. And often I'd be traveling with people who weren't my direct reports. They might have been another level down, or and field technicians and so on, and being able to just sit in the front as they're driving. And I think people tend to relax more when they'd be the one driving usually. And I think that because they're sort of, their mind is partly on the road and then partly just general chit chat. I think that tends to be a bit more disarming. So being in those situations were really, really valuable for me. So when I mentioned to you before we sort of got going that I'd sort of had got into consulting previously, and then found myself in this role in Canada. And then about 4 years ago, decided to part ways and go back into consulting again. It was really, for me, was just this evolution, especially over the last sort of 3 years, in what did consulting mean? I mean, a lot of people sort of take a step out of corporate life or other occupations and think, well, I'll become a consultant. I'll use my expertise to motivate people or help with strategic issues or whatever else. But I found myself working with an organization which was where morale was really low. I'd been brought in to help turn things around. And it was during that contract, which started out as 3 months and then became 6 months. And before I knew it, it was 18 months. But it was during that time working with people that I had a bit of an epiphany about what I want to be doing. And that was coaching.
Right.
So that's what got me into coaching. And so then I did the research and went and did a formal coaching qualification with the ICF. And so that's a big part of what I do. It's not all of what I do, but what I am focused on now is executive coaching and leadership development.
Gotcha. The piece, one of the pieces that you touched on that I instantly connected with the whole idea of, developing others, right? And oftentimes it's awakening what's kind of inside them already, or they don't recognize it's inside them, or don't recognize the value of what's inside them. It's oftentimes one of those sort of pieces that, when you're there for that aha moment, when you're, sparking people's eyes, that gets really exciting. So I'd imagine you see a lot of that.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people, there's some misconceptions about coaching, for example. Okay. So some people call themselves a coach, but they're probably acting more as a mentor or an advisor, because they tend to be giving a lot of advice. Whereas, real coaching is facilitating a journey for your client. It's about helping your client learn more about themselves, and at the same time to sort of be present with them and be aware of certain things the client might say or the way they react in certain situations, and then not letting them off the hook and starting to explore that more deeply. So
holding them accountable.
Yes. Yeah. There's the accountability piece, but it's also sometimes they'll start diving into an issue and they want to get out of exploring that issue because it's a little bit, confronting for them. And I think that it's really important to be there and be present for them and help them to sort of explore it more in a safe way. It's quite interesting. You can get to an end of a session and people say, well, thanks for all that great advice you gave me. And it's like, I haven't given any.
You did.
I just asked a few questions.
Well, and I think, though, going back to sort of what I touched on earlier, you're unearthing things inside of people that they already have, and it's more to kind of helping shine a light on that, and letting them sort of uncover the greatness. Is that an accurate way of putting it, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to be like somebody else. So, looking to other people and how they can replicate those, idols or whatever else, and they'll put a lot of energy in trying to be like somebody else rather than starting to explore themselves and understand themselves and accepting themselves, and then striving to be a better version of themselves, not, a copy, cheap imitation of somebody else, if you get what I mean.
No, I do. And it's a really good point, because, and I get it, right? You see a leader you admire, you see someone, a style that you can appreciate and that you want to emulate. And I think it's more about what can I take from that and apply to me and use it that works in my, because the other thing too is, their space that they're in is very different than yours. So not only are they different, their environments are different, the space are different, the people they're leading are different. So there's all these factors that make it so that you can't be them, but that doesn't mean you can't take from them.
Yeah, that's right. And all you're seeing is the image that they project as well. All right. So you could there's a big risk in trying to emulate somebody who seems really happy, but is actually miserable.
That's right. That's right.
Or has their own challenges, right? And so I think it's interesting helping and working with people to help them explore the things that they like about themselves rather than things that they don't. And that's probably a big, when those shifts start to happen, that's a really beautiful experience working with clients, or working, as a leader in different situations as well. I think that there's a lot of fun in helping people to discover things about themselves and make those realizations, and to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that come to mind is that, we are enough, right? We have what we need. We just got to figure out how to make it work for us. And again, we can look to all the other people all we want, but if they don't have what we need, they don't have our skills. Again, there's all these other factors that make the comparisons to apples and oranges. And that's where we have to be careful, because I think what happens, and I'll get your thoughts on this, Rich, where you spend so much time trying to be like someone else that is not you, it comes across inauthentic, and you can't maintain it.
Absolutely. It's very difficult to maintain. I totally agree. And you're right, it does come across as inauthentic. And that's, a big focus of, the work that I've been doing. And, I'm not an academic, but I've been doing a lot of research, but it's more researching academic work. around different aspects and elements of leadership, as much to just educate myself, but as well as that, to start to share some of those thoughts, as I do, through Instagram or through LinkedIn with my posts there as well. It's, what I'm posting is actually a synthesization, if that's the right word, of ideas that I've been reading.
Of course.
And there's a lot of work around authenticity and happiness as well. A lot of work out there that's really accessible and easy to read and get your head around. And I think the big thing is when you're not coming from within yourself,
mm-hmm.
right? It's very difficult to be authentic, because you're not representing yourself. You're representing what you think are attributes of somebody else. So it of course it's going to come across as inauthentic, and we hear more and more about that now. And I think that, I guess, in some ways, with social media where it's at now, which I didn't grow up with at all, right?
Oh, I hear you. I had to learn it too.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
So when I started my working life, we didn't even have mobile phones. So I really think that there's a lot of pressure nowadays on people, to portray themselves as happy and to portray themselves as successful, and without actually thinking what success is to them and what success really looks like for them. So it's, there's all this pressure to portray this, successful, happy life. And so through that, there's so much emulation of what other people are doing, especially with some of the big influencers, that person's traveling the world having photos of themselves by swimming pools, and that's obviously success. So that's the life I'm going to have. Is I want to have my photo taken next to 75 swimming pools and so on, right? Rather than, well, what actually makes me happy? Is that what I want to be doing? Is I probably maybe I don't. Maybe I want to be bushwalking or riding a motorbike or doing something that makes me happy. It's hard to take a photo of yourself when you're riding a motorbike, but some people do, I guess.
And this, but you do raise a really, really good point, Rich, in terms of what we emulate and what we see, as opposed to working on, our own sort of personal leadership style, right? Like, we all have our style because it's akin to who we are. There isn't just one type of leader anymore. Maybe the world of work was such where you're either this type of leader or that kind of leader, but those sort of models, they've all broken down. That's not the case anymore.
You could not be 100% more correct. Audley, I think that when you think about, I posted, and I've read a few, bit of research about MBAs, for example. So I have one, so but and I got my MBA quite a long time ago, but there really was not a lot of leadership education as part of an MBA. And I don't have the impression that has changed a lot. So the focus tends to be more organizational rather than on the individual. And as you say, that, that sort of, I guess, the archetypal leadership models was, and like people talk about situational leadership and adapting your leadership style to different situations. I buy into that a bit. I think that, the challenge with people growing up in sort of business today and starting out today is that there's just, again, so much noise about, what you should, what's okay and what's not. And it's a pretty tough, road to tread. And so people just tend to model themselves on who they see being successful in the workplace. That behavior has got this person ahead, so therefore I shall model that. But that's not always the right behavior to be modeling, especially if they're a tyrant, whatever else. So, I think that it's without that sort of like help in developing, especially I'm going to say, people in from their sort of late 20s through to even their early 40s, like that period of time as a leader, and leader takes a lot of different forms as well. That period of time is incredibly formative, and you can do a lot of damage to yourself by just focusing on modeling what other people are doing rather than understanding the type of leader that you really are.
No, that's exactly it. And the whole idea of recognizing where you stand, because I think once you're able to do that and understand you, and that's a whole piece around self-awareness, right, Rich? So once you're able to develop that own self-awareness, then you can figure out how you can best, motivate, inspire, get the best out of the people around you, right? But you've got to figure you out first. That's a big part of it.
You do. Absolutely. And it's all of it. It's about being aware of all of it. I guess, everybody's got prejudices, right? Sure. It's a function of, the community you were brought up in, your family's political views, I guess, and your religious beliefs. So a whole range of things that create prejudices, and everybody's got prejudices, right? And it's not like you should then go jump off a cliff because you've become aware of these prejudices. It's about being conscious and aware of them, because they are they can inform the way that you respond to situations. And once you have that awareness and have that thought process, you can then step back and say, well, hang on a second, why am I thinking this situation? Why am I assuming this about this person, for example? And being conscious that, that's coming from the prejudices of my background, or whatever else. And so it's very important that I'm aware of it, and then think again, what's really going on in this situation? What's going on for this person right now in front of me? Right. So, and then how can I help them?
That introspection piece is a big one, right? To be able to ask those questions, to be able to challenge your own beliefs. I mean, these prejudices that we have, some may be from our upbringing. That's how we were raised, and that's how we know. And all of a sudden, I'm questioning that, and I'm going, wait a second, everything I knew was wrong. Right?
That's right. And breaking that down it can be really tough. But it's not just prejudices as well. It's also about being aware of your strengths and weaknesses. Gotcha. And playing to your strengths, but also being conscious that, and I talk a lot about vulnerability as well. It's that sort of knowing where other people are stronger at things than you, and then surrounding yourself with those people. Yes. Okay. The best leaders are often the dumbest person in the room. And and it's really important to sort of have that, that consciousness that, okay, I'm actually not very good at making this type of decision. So I'm going to go and get some advice and ask other people how they would respond in that situation.
Gotcha. I was also thinking, as you said that, sometimes the worst leaders are also the dumbest ones in the room too, right?
That's true. But they're the ones who don't realize they're the dumbest one in the room. That's
right. They don't have that introspection piece we just talked about.
Yeah. I was just as an aside, I was reading a book by Austin Kleon, and he talks about especially from a creativity perspective, but you can apply this in many aspects of your life. If you walk into a room, find the brightest person in the room and go and stand beside them. Okay. And then start to discover what you can learn from them. Right. Yeah, and if you walk into a room and you find that you're the brightest person in the room, it's time to find another room.
You're in the wrong room. I get it.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're never smart enough. You never have nothing to learn.
That's right.
There's always something to learn.
And a key around that, and you just touched on, the V word, the vulnerability, that's a really big part of that, because you need to lay down, release that guard, if you will, put it down, put it to the side, and say, hey, I don't know everything. And for some people that's difficult because as a leader, I should know. I should have all the answers. People should come to me and I, solve all the solutions of the world. But I can't do that and still be vulnerable at the same time. So it's like, well, one or the other.
Yeah, that's really, really great point. And probably one of the most confronting, with my executive clients is that letting go of the fact that they need to know all the answers is really hard, really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability piece is a really vital part of that. And I often people sort of misinterpret vulnerability and what that is. Right? It doesn't mean turning into a blubbering mess in meetings, or it might happen at some point, right? But that's not what vulnerability is about.
Right.
Vulnerability is really about that willingness to, well, for me anyway, the willingness to not be right, the that understanding that I don't have all the answers, and then the courage to go and seek out those answers from other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. That is a big one. And I think the more and actually it's interesting because I think for those that are comfortable with being vulnerability, that actually shows there's a strength involved with that. Right.
Yeah.
It's okay. And it is a true sign of strength, but I don't think people always catch that.
No, that's right. And it's hard again, because especially if you've sort of been operating in a tough corporate culture where, people sort of walk in and they've all got their sort of armor on.
Yep.
Walking into work every day, or even outside of work as well, because it starts to permeate into their personal life often as well.
Right.
I think that really makes it difficult, working in that sort of environment, to think that it's okay to let your guard down a bit. It's okay to let people see who you really are.
Gotcha.
Right?
No, it's true.
And I'd say myself, I know that, in the past, I've probably been a little bit left field as a manager and leader, and the way that I operated. And it's probably ticked a few people off, like at more senior levels. It definitely has on a few occasions. And I guess
I'm intrigued, Rich. What'd you do?
Nothing in particular, just my style. Right? And just, being more, I guess I've got quite a familiar leadership style. Right. So I'll get to know people well. And not be one who, I'm just not that sort of command and control type. It's not, except at home, right, in the kitchen. Apart from that,
got to be somewhere.
Not really a command and control type. But there would sometimes be expectations that that's the way leaders should operate.
Right. Yes.
So you could be viewed as soft.
Right.
Right. And it's not soft. It takes a bit of courage to be that way. I guess where I was going with this is the one caveat of all of it is that, get to know yourself and be prepared to express yourself, but you don't have to let people see all of you.
Gotcha.
All right. It's
good point.
It's really important to be conscious of the fact that unless you are working in an organization full of these incredibly enlightened, self-aware, vulnerable leaders who, embrace the uniqueness of every person in the organization. Unless that's the case, it's really important to be aware of the things we spoke about before, that, people's prejudices and, the way they might view you, the lens they might look at you through, how they might interpret the way that you act in the workplace.
Yes.
And what that means about you as a leader and as a person. So it's important to have that consciousness and awareness.
Yep.
Right? That if there's, if you've got an absolute psychopath, of a boss, then it's just important to be aware that you're not going to be able to change that person. And
That's
probably, at some point you should probably leave.
Right.
Right.
Or
you ride it out and hope that they leave.
One of the two.
One of the two. Right.
Or test their wills.
Yeah, but in the meantime, it's really important to be aware, have that awareness of what's going on with other people as well.
Yes.
It's like, that they're not necessarily going to receive all of you in the way that you might hope that they would. So it's just, I'm not saying put that suit on, the armor. I'm just saying be yourself,
right?
But also be aware of how, I guess it's, do you set the volume on 10 or do you dial it back to 5 and still be yourself, and just, it's important to protect yourself a bit as well. Like don't lay yourself out there too much. And save the sort of 9 or 10 for when you're with your buddies, right?
Well, yeah. I think there's a time and place for everything, and really establishing boundaries is a really important thing too as a leader, because I think once you're able to do that, and you're firm within yourself, then you can actually work with people to the point, and you're accepting them for where they are too. So I think that's another important part, where you're sort of meeting people where they're at, and then you can really have that sort of dynamic working relationship at that point. Because you're both being your true selves.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, here's the I guess the crux of it. You can't necessarily change, if you're sitting a few layers down in the organization, you as an individual can't change the entire organization. Right. Okay, you just can't do that.
Right.
But you can change the culture in your part of the organization. And if you focus at the local level, something I call guerrilla leadership, it's like, if you focus at the local level, how do I make a difference in the team that I work in?
Yes.
Right. How do I make a difference for my direct reports? If I'm leading a team, if I'm not leading a team, an individual contributor or something like that, what can I do to start to shift the culture of the organization just a little bit, just the part of the organization I'm in, that and as a result start to, every day when I come to work, it's that little bit better, and I enjoy coming to work and working with the people that I work with. There are still things you can do in that regard. And again, it comes down to putting your trust in the people around you and being trustworthy, right?
You made another really, really good point around shifting the culture, and I want to touch on that because, oftentimes, there's a belief that, it can change the whole world, and you can. So we each all have our own sphere of influence, and in that circle, or in that sphere, if you will, that's where it starts, and it sort of, it's sort of like a ripple effect, right? It goes outwards, but it starts with where you're at. So I got Rich in front of me, and so I'm going to start with Rich, and then Rich and I are going to go to Mary, and then Mary and I are going to go to Tom, and that's how it evolves and grows. And I think that's a really important point, because shifting culture, and I know that's sort of the name of your brand, Culture Shifter, it starts with those little small steps.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. It's like being the butterfly in the Amazon, really. What can you do to start to make a difference? And it doesn't need to be big. Reaching out to somebody on your team who might be very quiet, probably could do with some help every now and again, is just going to offer the help them, ask them if they need any help anyway, rather than offering up advice.
I'm going to help you right now because you need my help.
That's right. You look like you need some help. And
that's awesome.
So I think it really is about how you can start to shape your leadership style, even with the way that you are with your peers, right? And if you do have a team and you've got a small team, like how can you make a difference each day? What can you do to build trust amongst your team and start exploring that? And it's as you say, it's all those small little incremental things. It takes time. It takes time to build trust, and as well as that, as long as it takes to build it, right, you can kill it in about 2 seconds flat.
Isn't that incredible? Right? That's incredible.
So,
when you think about that.
Yeah. So it's really a continual effort. You can't just build trust and then just assume that it stays that way. It's like a marriage, it's important to work on it every day, right? These things, it's when you don't, things start to fall apart and people don't speak to each other, and people start to then annoy each other and everything else. So it's really about that sort of ensuring that, you know, what you're doing is improving the space around you just a little bit.
Yeah. So we sort of talked about authenticity, and I would imagine that's an important aspect when you're trying to shift culture, because you've got to be real. Certainly trust is another really good point as well. Is there another sort of key element or trait that you can identify that important for leaders to be able to embrace or use when they try to make these, you know, these little shifts, but ultimately these big shifts?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say compassion.
Got you.
Right. And there's a lot of talk about empathy, right? And it's important to, you know, understand the difference. Empathy is, you know, is very much focused on what's going on for one individual or maybe a few individuals.
Right.
But it's difficult to be empathic towards everybody in the world at the same time. It's just not possible. But compassion is slightly different. Compassion is having an awareness of what's going on for people,
right,
but not necessarily feeling what's going on for them, right? And the reason I say that I'm making that distinction is that the compassion will allow you to make the tough decisions when you need to as well. So it's being aware that a decision has to be made, and it could be a very tough decision, all right? To save an organization from bankruptcy, you may have to actually let a portion of people go. Now, compassion is knowing that you're about to have a very negative effect on, you know, it could be, say, 10% of the workforce in these large organizations could be, you know, that could be 3,000 people that are getting let go. And we've seen things like that in the auto industry.
Right. And their families and everyone connected to them are impacted for sure.
Yeah, it's all of that. So, but it's that awareness that if we don't make this decision, the companies continue to spiral downwards, and we're going to affect 30,000 people's lives, not 3,000 people's lives. So it's being like, where's the compassion start and stop? Are you thinking about the 27,000 other people who are going to stay in the organization, or the 3,000? It's like taking a bit of an extreme, but there are people, you know, who've had to make decisions like that. You know, somebody I would love to have worked with would be Alan Mullally, who turned Ford around, and before that, Boeing after 9/11, and he had to make a lot of tough decisions. But at the same time, he was a guy that would go and sit in the regular cafeteria and have lunch with whoever was sitting there. So, you know, he was, again, making tough decisions. But sometimes, like when you think about empathy, that decision could get tied up by 2 or 3 people that you know amongst that 3,000 people who are going to be affected. Gotcha. And that can really affect, you know, have an impact on the decision you're going to make, rather than thinking about the broader organization. So don't want it to be a really negative thing when I'm talking about, because these things happen. But I guess my point is that the compassion is really, you know, for me, about having that awareness of what's going on for other people.
Yes.
And being sensitive to what's going on for them at any point in time. So when you've got a team, you know, you might somebody who, you know, they're going through, you know, a marital breakdown or some sort of issue, or somebody's got a sick child, or, you know, there are a lot of things like that. It's being aware of what's going on for them, and making some accommodations for how they might be, behaving or performing at work, is probably a better way to put it. And at the same time, being able to sit down with them and say, look, I understand you're going through this challenge. What can I do, or what can the organization do to help? Right? If the person says they need time, then give them time off, or, you know, it's whatever else. But it's about being aware of what's going on for them. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to feel what's going on for them. It's about being aware and then asking how you can help. Yeah.
What's fascinating when you sort of talk about compassion, or even the trust, the empathy, you know, the authenticity, all those things, I think when you say those words, people know exactly what they are. They can identify with them, but to put them in practice in the business context seems to be the disconnect, if you will.
Yeah. It's that not coming across as too soft kind of thing, right? I think it's okay. personally. But again, it's important to be aware of the broader culture of the organization, right? And not stick your head up out of the hole, too often. If it's a tough organization, or you could be in working in a really great culture.
Yeah.
And if you are, then stay there.
I heard a quote by Jack Welch that comes to mind now when he said the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And I think that very much is aligned with what we're talking about here. Like, it does definitely take work to do the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon Sinek's been talking a lot about that recently. Right? This whole concept of soft skills, and Richard Branson has talked about that in the past as well. Mm-hmm. And he's made some mistakes, but he's been big enough to come out and say he's made mistakes and own them and apologize where he has. But I think it's that, that awareness that none of us are perfect and we're going to make some mistakes, right? Yes. We are going to make mistakes. And it's more how you respond to those. And as you say, the soft skills aren't soft skills. Right. The people skills are hard. Right. It's takes a lot of work and a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness and being mindful of what's going on for yourself and for, what's going on around you as well. Like mindfulness piece. It's like put the phone down. Yeah. Right. And
be here and present, right? Yeah. Be present with people. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We talk about turning off our phones on the right here. Like, we got to be present. So I get it loud and clear. And you're right. Yeah. I agree. I just want to go back to this shifting of culture thing because Rich, it's tough, and this is your playground. So I'm glad we're on this topic. I'm wondering the time frame or process. Like, how long can it take to change an organizational culture we're talking about? Like, is it a matter of necessarily changing the people, because people will make up organizations, or is it deeper than that?
I think, well, first of all, I talked about those small incremental changes deep down the organization. If you want to change the entire organization's culture, it's got to happen at the top. It can't happen anywhere else. It's not, you're not going to get this groundswell happen anywhere near fast enough at the grassroots level to change an organization.
Right.
So at the end of the day, it does come at the top. And sometimes it could be, the realization from a leader that, there are certain things about their style that is creating the culture. It could be the way that their team is together. But it has to happen at the top executive team level. Yep. And that really, first of all, has to start with, self-awareness for them amongst themselves, and that awareness, consciousness of how they operate as a team and how that is perceived below them as well. So it's got to start at the top, and it's not like a 3-month thing. It takes a long time. Especially where you've got legacy issues. I went and worked in with an organization a couple of years ago, and it was a unionized workforce, and I'm going to say a cynical management team. Okay, right. Not all of them managers, but some cynicism. I'm going to say some cynicism towards the union. So you've got unions that are there to protect workers' rights and interests. Right. And then you've got, the management team that often, have their own concerns about the inflexibility that can cause for them. And so then you get create an environment where it's almost constantly at war, right? This constant distrust of management. And the only way that you can start to break through that is to actually start, you've got to park that belief at the door. So sometimes if you want to start shifting the culture of the organization, first thing to do is step back and say, well, and I talked about prejudices. What are the organizational prejudices that exist? Right. What is the stance that the organization takes towards the unionized workforce? Right. Yeah. And what assumptions are the unionized workforce making about the what I'm going to call management.
Right.
And so, I had situations that where, we had sort of workers who were earning significantly more than the supervisors that were overseeing their work, right?
Wow.
Because of the terms of the agreements and everything else, but probably a lack of awareness of that fact amongst the unionized workers. So you start to get all these misperceptions that need to be broken down. And I worked in that organization for 18 months. I'd say it took about 12 months to start to build trust, enough trust to get some real willingness to work together. And I'm really pleased to say that, there are some leaders there that I coached into the roles, and they were promoted a few times, and they're still maintaining that cooperative work together mindset.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And they're asking lead hands, right, how they would deal with a particular challenge, rather than just saying, we need you to increase productivity by 15%. It's like, well, what do you think we could do to increase productivity by 15%?
It's a different question, right? It's a different statement right there.
Yeah, it's a question.
Yeah, it's a question. One's a statement, one's an order, right?
Yeah.
And the other one's a question, because it's showing us doing it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this was an organization of 350 people.
Sure.
Right. It's not a massive organization. And
right.
You imagine trying to change the culture of some of the, large automobile manufacturers or whatever else. And I know some of them have got, like what Alan Mullally did at Ford, that took a long time. That wasn't an overnight thing. I mean, he made some pretty, fast inroads early on, but that was a long project for him to really turn not just Ford around, but transform the industry.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so like to be thinking that big, it takes some special individuals, and again, needs to happen from the top. And it's not a quick fix. That's really not.
I think that's a really good example. I mean, he came in to change his company and revolutionize the industry. And that's outstanding, really. And as you mentioned, it does take that kind of vision to be able to see where we collectively, globally, can go. And so that's pretty awesome. Rich, I wanted to touch upon your experience internationally as working as executive leadership coach. And just wondering, are there any differences when you sort of look at how different countries operate from a leadership standpoint? Are there, because I would say you have that sort of unique perspective where you've been exposed to different types of leaders in different countries, different situations. Are they all the same thing we're talking about here, or are there some uniquenesses?
I think you do get cultural differences.
Yeah.
I definitely, an organization I worked in, I was in Canada, but you've got people from all over the world, and you people from different parts of the world in leadership positions, and their styles can be very different, very, very different. So, I've been exposed to, autocratic individuals, and I got to be careful when I say this. What I'm going to say is, like, first of all, that having, if you've haven't had a lot of experience with somebody from a particular country, the fact that they might be a psychopath does not mean that everybody from that country is a psychopath.
That is correct.
Okay. So I got to be careful about what I say.
Understood.
Right. So, but you can sort of come to that sort of conclusion that that's, maybe they're all like that, in South America or wherever else. Right. I think it's important to sort of be conscious of some differences in the way different countries are. And I'm going to use Canada and Australia as a really great example, really fantastic example, because, two countries with ties back to Britain.
Yeah.
And, established through colonization, very similar legal systems and so on. Some differences as well, like some of Canada being the way it is part of, like, colonial North America. And, there is a tie to that whole settlement of the Americas.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
but are some real differences between Australians and Canadians, and Australians can come across as quite brash.
Got you.
And basically, we'll call a spade, right? Right, rather than argue whether it's a shovel or a spade. Okay,
right.
So I think that that Canadians will be a lot more polite, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they might describe the spade as like, a tool that you would, use to
That's right.
open the ground, and you should really make sure that there's nobody, you're not going to hurt anybody in the process or whatever else. I'm exaggerating.
Yeah. No, I get your point. I get your point.
Nobody attack me in the street, but I'll walk down the street.
You'll be fine.
No, I except when they get on the ice, right? And that's yeah. Or behind the wheel on the 401. But apart from that, like there are some real differences in the way that I've noticed businesses done in Canada than in Australia. A lot, much more polite, and Australians would just tend to get to the point a lot faster. And that can I guess that can annoy people, if they're not aware of it. Sure. That's just the way Australians are. You put a bunch of Australians in the room together, they wouldn't think that they were being brash or obnoxious at all. But for me, sitting from afar, I could see now how Australians would be perceived. So yeah, culture, there are big differences, I think, in culture, even between organizations in Canada and Australia. And yet you look, we call Canadians Australians on ice. Like there are a lot of similarities, similar sense of humor and so on, but just more measured and considerate in Canada than in Australia.
Got you. So, and Rich, has been a great chat. I really appreciate you being here. And I want to ask you one last question to tie this piece up here. Do the tactics then change when we talk about, again, going back to sort of shifting cultures, depending on, so you just gave the example between Australia and Canada as an example, two different countries. Do the approach, their tactics need to be changed when you're shifting these cultures in these respective countries?
Yeah. A little bit. And as I said, like for me, when I arrived here, I'd worked and lived in the UK for 5 years early on in my career.
Yep.
And then a lot of time in Australia, even though I did travel a lot, but I was working for Australian organizations. When I moved here, it probably took me about 6 months to really adapt my style and just be conscious and aware that you can't speak to a Canadian in the same way as an Australian. They might actually think you're rude. It could come across the wrong way. So yeah, I think that there are differences in approach based on communication styles and culture as well.
Knowing your audience, I guess. Yeah.
I also don't think anybody understood a word I was saying for like the first year or two. But it's about being subtle, having that subtle awareness of people's differences. And I know from my own experience, I hadn't appreciated that enough when I first arrived, and it took me a little while to actually understand, how I needed to behave differently, how I needed to communicate or adjust my communication to hit the point, right? Yep. And to touch people, in a different way.
Yeah. Well, Rich, I think the whole, again, why absolutely I wanted to have this conversation with you is just the whole idea of shifting cultures and shifting the frame of way of thinking, way of doing things. And so that involves a whole layer of self-analyzation, introspection, some honesty, a whole bunch of things before these aspects of change can be brought about. So I really do appreciate you sharing some of those insights. Again, I think there's a lot of good stuff to be taken from that. For our listeners and viewers who want to know more about you, the work that they can do, where can we send them, Rich?
You can go to cultureshifter.ca, or you can find me on Instagram if you want to see some of the stuff that I share there. Yeah, it's at Culture Shifter.
Awesome.
Or
Awesome.
you can go to richstephenson.ca, but it's the same website as Culture Shifter, just different
Gotcha.
URL.
That's it. Yeah, you got to make sure we understand that the Stephenson name is living strong and doing good work out
That's
there.
exactly right.
Well, Rich, listen, again, like I said, I appreciate you doing this. This has been awesome. And be well, my friend.
You too. And it's great to meet you.
Take care.
And great discussion.
Awesome. Back we are here on the podcast, and my thanks and appreciation goes out to Rich, certainly for the insightful conversation when we talk about culture. And I really appreciated hearing about some of the things that we can do to influence culture, and you know what needs to happen for a shift to be made. I think the conversation was great, and I think people are really going to walk away with some good insights. Speaking of walk away, Rich certainly left us with a lot to think about. But if there is just one thing that I would take from our conversation, it would be this. There's no question that culture is important, and it matters because it can have a direct impact on our general health and our day-to-day lives and of our organizations. When things become difficult or challenging, that's when leaders need to step in and figure out how to bring change to shift the culture. But there's a piece in this that's very, very important that we shouldn't lose sight of. An established culture is formed by a series of habits. Habits at an individual, team, and organizational level. Shifting the culture of an organization means that recognizing that the habits of those three individuals, again, those three levels, the individual, team, and organization, make a difference no matter how small they appear to be. If you're looking to make your organizations more audacious, look at the small habits and things that can be changed first. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, I'd certainly encourage you that you do so by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com. All you've got to do is enter in your email address and you will immediately be alerted every time we got brand new content that comes out. We've reached the end of another episode of the podcast, and really, really appreciate our listeners. And as always, got to send my thanks for their ongoing support. It's so much appreciated. And again, I encourage you to keep this audacious train moving, and we will do our part as well. So again, thank you, and thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stephenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.